Welcome to the Beehive. We're talking with Sharonda Amamilo, who is running for Superior Court Judge in Thurston County. But first, the Beehive theme song.
You're now entering the Beehive with your host, Double B.
Welcome to the Beehive. I'm your host, Double B, aka Bobby. And with this video, please just give us a like our Facebook page, subscribe to our YouTube, or even better, leave us a comment, because that's one of the things that helps get the video out there. And I'm also interested to hear what you think. We're talking to a special person today, Sharonda Amamilo, who is in the middle of what I would consider kind of a historic election. She's running to be a Superior Court judge in Thurston County. And if she wins, she would be the first Black female judge in Thurston County's history. So, I mean, that's something in itself. But beyond that, she also just strikes me as a very analytical person, someone that really understands compassion. We connected because she's also worked with youth in foster care, which is something, I've done for a long time. And I just thought it was a really interesting conversation. So here's your chance to get to know Sharonda. Welcome to the Beehive. Let me start over. See, I need to get in the zone now too, All right, our guest today is Sharonda Amamilo. Thank you so much for coming, Sharonda.
Thank you for having me, Bobby.
I'm glad to have you here. So you are running to be a judge in the Superior Court in Thurston County. Why you? What's inspiring you to do this?
Bobby, I've spent the last 17 years of my legal career just trying to figure out how to be as helpful as I can to people who find themselves in crisis, whether they are pre-court involved or actually court involved. And I found that when I listen very well to people, I can get to the root of the thing that brought them to the situation or is contributing to the situation. And so in the past 17 years, I've dedicated my career to helping people learn how to be better problem solvers in their lives, and helping them get a fair process if they do end up in the court system. And this past fall, I decided that I needed an opportunity to just challenge myself to do more. I'm a career public defender, and I know that there's a time in people's lives where they feel like either I can do more or I can just keep dialing it in. And I'm not the kind of person, my energy level requires me, a lot of it out of obligation, I think, because I can do more to figure out how to get upstream. I ended up leaving the Thurston County Public Defender's Office after 12 years last fall and starting my own law firm representing children in foster care because they're the most vulnerable, and just trying to figure out how to help people deal with trauma, stress, frustration, all those sorts of things, so that they can have the support that they need. And then in January, sitting Judge Ann Hurst determined that she was going to retire this year, but she really put out a clarion call, not just to attorneys, but also to the community about what exactly what would we like to see on our Superior Court bench, and what do we expect from our Superior Court bench, and what would we benefit from? And from that, friends of my own and myself determined that I represent a lot of what she may have meant.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about foster care, because I think that's something we can definitely connect on. I worked with youth in foster care for, over 7 years, and still work with a lot of youth in foster care. I bet we've even worked with a lot of the same youth. Yeah. So what kind of stuff would you be doing with them? You have a foster youth that comes to you. How are you working with them in the court system?
So they come in multiple ways. A foster youth could be truancy involved, which is the Becca bill, where they've, missed so much school that they are subject to court oversight. And then you have children who are in foster care who have actual criminal charges against them. And so they're considered cross-system children. And those children not only have the trauma from being in foster care and whatever happened in their childhoods that have them outside of the care of their parents, but they now have that same behavior oftentimes contributing to the underlying reasons why they now have a criminal charge as well. And they come in so many different ways. And I found in my career that almost all the juveniles that come before the court, and especially the juveniles in the foster care system, need so much support in the area of trauma and mental health support. Yeah. And just kind of, they haven't had the opportunity to have resilience built in based on experience of making a mistake and getting the support that they need.
Mm-hmm. I heard someone at a conference once, and this really stuck with me, and they were talking about how their father was a coal miner, and they would bring a canary kind of in the cage with them when they would go into the coal mines. And, if the canary dies, they're not asking, what's wrong with this canary? This canary's broken. It's like there's obviously something wrong with the environment. Mm-hmm. And so you can kind of think about that, about youth who've been through trauma. And when a kid is acting out, it's not always just, what's wrong with this kid, but what's wrong with the environment and what they've experienced,
Exactly. And that's one of the things that is very important to understand as a judicial officer, right? You have a 16-year-old with mm-hmm. the supportive and background and not any true traumatic experiences other than trying to find oneself when you're 16. And you have a different 16-year-old who's had all kinds of trauma at an early age, who essentially has had their development either arrested or mm-hmm. severely delayed because it was impacted. Stress reduces your ability to be able to develop at a what we would consider the normal rate.
So what I just imagine, you've had your whole career as a defense attorney, that like a detractor could be like, well, she's going to be soft on crime or let everyone get away with things or something. What's your response to that?
Yeah. And you know what? That question has come up, and my response is that I would not be running for a judicial position if I didn't believe that I could adhere to the requirements of the law. One of the things that is very dear to me as a representative is being very clear with my client and being very clear with the court about what the law requires. And so I'm one of the ones who, in a very whatever area of law that I'm working in, I'm one of the ones who is most likely to say out loud on the record, RCW so and so and so and so says, Your Honor, and I think that means blah blah blah. And so I'm more likely to apply the statute as its direct language and not use discretion in interpretation unless the statute is vague. And even in that case, I'm going to go and check and see what the courts of appeals have done to interpret that statute so that there's some consistency in the law. But that doesn't take away from the ability to do the types of things that we talked about earlier, considering individual circumstances that may be a mitigating or aggravating factors. And those are also laid out in the statute as well. I would not be running for this position if I didn't believe that I could suspend judgment, take in all the information from both sides, and render a decision that is fair and equitable. I don't know if you're aware or not, but I'm over 20 years experience in the United States Army as an intelligence analyst. Mm-hmm. And as an analyst, you really have to consider all of the questions that are posed by the information in front of you. And you also have to consider all of the questions that aren't being asked or answered by the information in front of you. And that's kind of the way that I approach my work, to ensure that my client, when they give me a direction or they make a decision, that it is well informed.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about your Army career some in a second, but I think with being a judge, it just seems like such a huge amount of power to have. Like, you can decide you know, if someone's going to be in a cage for years or something, and that just seems like a lot of pressure to really make the right choice. Or, you know, it's just an observation, but
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you are framing it in a way that really should cause people to pause. Is
mm-hmm,
it about power or is it about duty?
mm-hmm,
Is it about power or is it more about trying to ensure that you do the right thing, that you make the right choice, that every single person in front of you facing that type of consequence as in your example, that you are doing the right thing by that person as well as the right thing by the victims
mm-hmm,
who have suffered as a response as a result of their choices or their behavior. So it's not about power. I don't see it as about power. I see it as a somber duty to try and make the right decision in a difficult situation. And you can't right. You sometimes you can right all the wrong, but from my experience, that's very difficult to do. That you're able to right all the wrong, but to bring justice doesn't mean that you've righted all the wrongs. It means that you've brought something to the table where when the victim walks away, they feel heard, they feel restored, they feel safe, as well as when the defendant walks away, they feel heard, they feel that the outcome was just, and that they can do their time with some sort of peace of mind, and everybody has some closure.
yeah. Do you think systemic oppression has a big role in the court system and the justice system?
I'd like to have a clear idea of what you mean when you say systemic oppression, because it means different things to different people.
Well, I guess I'm thinking specifically of like racism, or you see incarceration rates, or how long people are sentenced for. Like a white person might be sentenced for X amount of time and a black person longer for the same crime, you know?
In studying that, and I think it's, it depends on where you are in the world, right? And where you are in the country, really.
Yeah.
But in studying that, I think we have at our disposal a lot of data,
Mm-hmm.
right? We have a lot of data. And if you are analytical in your thought processes or in your approaches, the data reveals patterns. And even if you, the decision maker, right, aren't thinking in your mind that you're being racist or that you're being prejudicial, if the patterns reveal that the result is prejudicial or appears to be racist because of its harsh disparate impact on certain groups, then you have an obligation or an opportunity, right? An opportunity to be aware of that and making sure that the decisions that you're making aren't based on something other than the fact pattern in front of you. So I come to the table with a different experience than most of the decision makers that came before me, right? Or all of the decision makers that came before me in the case of Thurston County. So in my ability to translate, my ability to take in information and it inform my thought processes is different because of my experiences. So it does it appear that the justice system has a racist impact on Black and brown people? The answer is yes, it does appear. And why does it appear that way? Because the data says so. And even if you don't have the data, just fill up a prison yard and look out.
Mm-hmm.
You can see with your own eyes. So what can we do? And what opportunities do we have as judicial officers to have a hypervigilance about what we are relying on as part of the tools we're applying to make our decisions?
Let's talk about some of the issues in the community. I know you were part of a group that kind of focused on human trafficking. How big of a problem is that, and what does that even look like in our community? I'm really curious about that.
As a juvenile defense attorney, I represented a young lady once who was charged with some sort of assault, literally a schoolyard fight. In that process, we ended up discovering that there was a peer-to-peer recruiting ring for young ladies to be available for men at a county local hotel or motel or something like that. And so part of the recruiting included being at certain places, doing certain things, going, showing your, commitment to the process, and getting out was a very difficult process. And thus my client ended up being, ultimately the charges went away when we got to the root of it all, but my client ended up having to fight her way out of the peer-to-peer recruiting ring in her high school. Yeah, and then I had another one who was at in a situation where she was on probation, and she had been gone for a number of months. And when she was brought back to Thurston County, she would not talk about where she had been. And we discovered that she had essentially been kept against her will in a ring in Burien, or right outside of SeaTac. That's a very big hotbed. We have other knowledge that I have about kids being back and forth between Olympia and Portland, back and forth on I-5. And so the community has experienced, whether it knows it or not, one-offs as well as ongoing adolescents at risk or involved in human trafficking, commercial sex trafficking.
Wow. Yeah, it's something you just never imagined to be part of the community, or you really just don't see that at all if you're just living your normal day-to-day life. So policing has been a hot issue just across the country right now. What needs to change, and how can the court be a part of that?
I think there's been so much talk about bias, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we talk about implicit bias more than in confirmation bias, but there are lots of other types of bias. And one of the other types of bias that isn't talked about much is authority bias, right? When law enforcement says we were following training protocols, we were following orders, then there's a tendency for society as a culture, or there has been a tendency for society as a culture to just default to, well, they were following training protocol, they were following, orders, and what else do we expect? But I think if you just defer to authority bias, you miss the opportunity to determine how that authority was either used, misused, abused, or applied in general. You just default to, well, that's what the authorities said. And authority bias is a real thing. I would encourage people to understand what it means, because when you go to court and the officer has to testify, they come in full uniform, they come in full regalia, right? Judges are looking at the officer in uniform. The defendant is looking at the officer in uniform. The prosecutor is leaning heavily on the appearance of the officer and talking about the credibility of the officer in uniform. Are we as a society all suffering from authority bias, where we're not even questioning to the degree? I mean, those are real legitimate questions that need to be looked at further. And as a judicial officer, we have to make sure that we are not being susceptible to authority bias. And that's not to say this to swing the pendulum in the opposite direction and just say we suspect officers. I mean, if you're assessing basic credibility of every witness in front of you or every person in front of you, then you should be able to do that for an officer too.
Let's talk a little bit about your Army career. So you said you've been in the Army over 20 years. How did you get first into that?
I was married to a soldier early on, very young in life, and we started changing bases, and we landed in El Paso, Texas, and I couldn't get a job at McDonald's at 20 without speaking Spanish. And I had 2 years of college, and it was kind of like, okay, this is America, but not quite, this is the United States, but not quite. Culturally, I'm in an environment that's very integrated, Spanish, Hispanic, and Latino, Latinx. And I realized that I didn't have time to learn enough Spanish, right? And I really wanted to be a contributing working person. I wasn't working, hadn't been working for like 6 months or so. I had children, and I think my youngest was like, I don't know, she was under 1. She was very young. And so I said, okay, well, if I can't work at a regular job in the economy, then I'll join the Army. I'll just have this, I'll work for the same company that he does. That literally was my thought process. And
Wow.
I did. And so I joined the Army when I had a 2-year-old and an under 1-year-old, almost 3-year-old and a under 1-year-old. And I was gone for like 7, 8 months, going through basic training and my analyst training. And then I spent 4 years active duty. I'm an airborne, I'm a paratrooper. I spent time in it's a tactical unit at Fort Bragg, where, we jump out of planes and we go to the field and the boys do everything that the girls do. That's just what it was. But I've always been an analyst. And I spent that first 4 years really taking advantage of every opportunity to challenge myself. I also deployed to Desert Storm, which was our first beginning of this whole war on terror sort of thing. And since that time, I've been stationed here at Fort Lewis at JBLM, and I think that background informs also my ability to understand the veterans that would come before the court. And I think sometimes their experiences aren't fully understood in how it translates in the way that they communicate, in the way that they interpret what's going on around them. And I think it's important that I bring to the table an opportunity for them to have a judge who can understand that.
Well, so how has the campaign experience been? I know you're not allowed to fundraise as a judge, right?
Right, right.
So are you just funding the whole campaign yourself, or?
Oh, the campaign committee is allowed to fundraise. The
Okay.
judicial candidates and judges are not allowed to be part of it. So there's fundraising going on, but I
Uh-huh.
don't know when it's happening. I don't know where it's happening. I don't know those things. If there is an event that, like, for example, I give you for example, I had a virtual kickoff, and
Mm-hmm.
I was required to do a 1.5 or 2 minute video intro. And then the video intro was then played at the beginning of the Zoom meeting of the kickoff. And then folks participated, and there were guest speakers and there were other folks speaking, but I wasn't part of the Zoom meeting. I wasn't allowed to
Wow,
be
that
there.
seems so different.
Yeah, so I'm not part of it. And I know that those things are going on in the background, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm not part of who's asking or who's collecting or who's, encouraging. I'm not part of that part
Can
at
you
all.
can you see a video recording of it after?
Yes, I saw after, but I think it was like a couple of days. I think they must have kept it locked down for me because I didn't even know what the link was.
Uh, so what about, are you doing a lot of knocking on doors and meeting people? Or I guess it's
Yeah,
kind of a weird time to be knocking on doors.
no. And so you have to think of other ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm the one that if you ask for a yard sign, I'm going to show up and bring it to you.
Uh-huh. Wow.
And so we're 6 feet away. We have a mask on, and I'm the one who, other than the folks my volunteers that are putting signs out in general areas, but if you ask for a yard sign at your house and I am available, I'm the one that's bringing it to you.
Mm. Are you learning anything new through the campaign process, or is it helping you grow as a person in any way?
And that's been the most rewarding part, is that this has been a very positive learning experience. I've never been a candidate before, so I had no idea what to expect, really. And I really leaned heavily on my campaign manager, and she is a very dynamic person. Her name is Molly Sullivan, and anyone else is going
Oh,
to
I know
run.
Molly. Yeah.
Yeah, she's going to, if you're going to run a campaign in the future, I would highly recommend her. Just a partnership. I mean, she's a very good partner. She's a very good cheerleader. I told her up front, Molly, Like, I'm the person that you just need to keep getting after. Just tell me I can do this. I've also been very pleased about how positive an experience it has been. I'm just listening to people about what they care about. And for those people who are not quite sure what the Superior Court is all about in general, being able to communicate and explain to them from a firsthand experience about what happens in Superior Court. Because I think people might not realize that most of the voting population that votes for your judges aren't the customers of the courthouse. They aren't the people that are using the courthouse. And so I think it's very important that you be accessible. And people have just been very warm in their reception of my message. I won't walk away from this experience feeling less than blessed, because I have been blessed.
Hmm. Well, you seem like some core values for you are like compassion, being very driven, being analytical. Did you have any early experiences that kind of shaped you being that way, or?
Yeah, it's those traveling salesmen in the rural America that bring around those encyclopedia sets that are overly priced. A lot of
Uh-huh.
people will understand when families were door-to-door salesmen. As a little kid, I'm the first grandchild in my family. I'm the kid that was hiding in a tree in my grandma's backyard somewhere with a book up there with me. I have always been aware that I am just one person in a great big world. And when I say always, I'm talking about always from the point where I had a sense of self and a sense of self-awareness. That you can look at it like a machine, and I'm a cog, and like, how do I fit? Which way am I supposed to turn? If I turn this way, what's going to happen in a big machine? If I turn that way, what's going to happen in a big machine? So I've always been like this big picture framework, and where do I fit? And then from there, it's what will my choice, what impact will my choice have outside of me? It might be good for me, but what impact might it have outside of me? And I find that in the end, if I try to be helpful, if someone needs my help, if someone asks for my help, not forceful, but if I try to be helpful, that tends to make it right. That tends to be the most effective. So that's the foundation of it. In reading the encyclopedia, coming from a very, very small place in rural North Carolina, I knew at an early age that the world was huge,
Mm-hmm.
huge, far beyond what I could see in my little rural area.
Well, do you have any closing thoughts or things you want to say to potential voters or to the community at large?
Yeah, someone asked me what are my three things that kind of like frame my approach to law and the practice of law, and hopefully as a judicial officer. And I would say that they are equity, community, and justice. And I don't think that as a judicial officer you can ever forget the importance of making sure that the community feels welcome and invited into the court system, so that it goes both ways. It keeps a dialogue open about what the community wants to see, what the community norms are. And it also reminds you as a judicial officer that you're a servant of the people, right? Things change over time. Community norms change over time. And, we don't have the same justice system that we had 10, 20 years ago, maybe 20 years ago. And we shouldn't. And we won't have the same justice system 20 years from now, and we shouldn't. But we could get in a space where we have a crisis when justice is defined only by the stakeholders that operate within it. So I think it's very important that community is part of that equation going forward. And I hope that that is compelling to the community, and that they will vote for me as the next Superior Court judge for Thurston County.
How can people learn more about you?
Sure. My website is www.electsharondaamamilo.com.
And what day is election day?
Well, next week you'll be getting your ballots. I think they mail out on July 15th. And the auditor's office or elections office will start accepting them on July 17th. Drop dead date is August 4th is the actual primary day. So I hope all of you will vote. I hope you'll vote early, and I hope you'll encourage everyone you know who's eligible to vote as early as possible. for Sharonda Amamilo, Thurston County Superior Court Judge, Position 8.
Well, Sharonda, just thank you so much for taking the time and for getting into it with me about the issues. And I'm hoping nothing but the best.
Thank you, Bobby. It was so wonderful to see you again. And these questions were very insightful and broad. And I hope that people get the information that they need, but they're always welcome to go to the website and ask, and I will answer you.
Awesome. Well, thank you. So again, Sharonda, just thank you for taking the time. We're wishing you the best of luck with this and, you know, all the future amazing things I'm sure you're going to be doing. As a side note out there, you know, I mean, COVID is just as bad as ever. So please be wearing your mask. And, you know, this does not count as wearing the mask. One, because it totally just defeats the whole point of wearing the mask. And two, because it just doesn't look as cool. You know, I mean, if we're going to be doing this, let's at least have a little style. I mean, it just looks way better. Next week, I'm going to be talking to Brad Fischetti from the legendary boy band LFO. I like girls that wear Abercrombie and Fitch. I mean, come on. That was like the hit of the year, you know, at least the hit of the summer. So, you know, we're going to be talking about what it's like to be in a boy band. I'm curious. So join us next week. We'll see you there. Please share. Please leave a comment. Give us a like. We're out. Bhive. Peace.